Joining me now is Marianne Franks, professor in intellectual property, technology, and civil rights law at George Washington Law School, president of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, and author of the new and important book, Fearless Speech, Breaking Free from the First Amendment. Professor Franks, good to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good to see you.
I want your sort of global view about this. We have literally the greatest purveyors of misinformation coming together, and now the misinformation phone call is going to be coming from inside the House. What's your first thought about what we need to be thinking about?
The first thought is that this was entirely predictable, that when people used to idealize the marketplace of ideas, I think what they didn't realize is that this is exactly what it looks like. It looks like a billionaire egotist with very partisan goals who's mostly concerned about lining his own pockets. That's what it looks like. It's someone who's tweaking their own algorithm, amplifying their voice over everyone else. It's someone taking sides in a democracy and saying, this is what everyone is going to listen to, whether they like it or not, and becoming a propaganda outlet. That's what we've got. And up until this point, it hasn't been technically the case that Elon Musk was a government agent, but now it looks like he's going to be. And so I think the first thing we need to recognize is that we are in serious trouble, and our theories about freedom of speech and the First Amendment have not been adequate. They have not been adequate safeguards for keeping us from this moment.
Well, I'm not going to ask you to summarize decades of important work that you've done, including in your new book. But what's the elevator pitch to our understanding about freedom of speech, or as Elon Musk called it when he took over Twitter, this town square? What's our misunderstanding about freedom of speech and the role that it should play in our society?
Well, it is a complex question, but I think the summary of it is that the First Amendment is something that can be used by basically anyone with any kind of goals. It can be weaponized for people's very tribal interest. It can be weaponized for power to take more power. And we have to be on our guard about that. And we can't believe that simply because someone says they're doing something on the basis of free speech or to protect freedom of speech, that's what they mean. Because what you've already seen for some time is that members of Congress and governors of places like Florida have been saying, oh, in order to protect free speech, we have to censor ideas and words and concepts and books. And so we need to reject that idea. We need to understand that the First Amendment, if it means anything, means keeping the government out of making these kinds of decisions for people, what we can think about, what we can read, what we can say. And everything else we need to think about in terms of freedom of speech needs to think beyond legal doctrine. We need to think about what it means to actually be brave, to be fearless, to criticize power, to take history seriously. And all of those things aren't going to come out of a legal doctrine. They're going to come out of the examples from history and around the world of people doing exactly that.
Right. And in this hour, we've spoken to Maria Ressa about what that looks like. We will be talking to Jodi Picoult about what that looks like with respect to book banning. But you made an interesting point. There's a weird intersection here. It's not just that Elon Musk heads one of the most important and widely used social media platforms. It's not just that he's the world's richest man. It's not just that he has government contracts through Starlink and with Tesla and with SpaceX. It's that he may be about to become a member of this government. In a normal world, the conflicts around all of this would be a 5-alarm fire, and yet it doesn't seem to be.
It doesn't seem to be precisely because we've had an information environment for over a decade now that is so polluted and so toxic that people can't actually find the truth, even if they want to find it. And increasingly, people don't want to find the truth. They just want to find whatever information is out there that will validate their worldview. They want to find anecdotes and outrage bait and all those things that just so happen to make things more profitable for people who own social media platforms. So the problem isn't just Elon Musk. It isn't just Facebook. It isn't just Instagram. It's all of those things. It's the fact that billionaires are owning our newspapers and many times news stations. It's that we've had this problem for several years now, and we haven't been sounding the alarm before. And we keep being sold this idea that, oh, if you want freedom of expression, come to the social media platforms, live online, right? And essentially get all of your news and all of your information from here. And we've been duped, for over, I would say 2 decades into believing that what you get online is unfettered truth or unfettered access to information, when in fact, all this time, what we've been getting is what power always wants, which is to reproduce itself and to increase its hold over the people.
What is the, I'm sure you get this question a lot, what's the thing that the consumer of information can employ to combat this? Because I think this is a multi-pronged effort, right? It'll have to be legislative. It'll have to be regulatory. It'll have to be something that we think about at all levels of business and personal life. But what can my viewer do, given what you've just told us?
The first thing to think about is think about who's benefiting from the story that you're being told. And if you know that the environment that you are swimming in is owned by a billionaire, or if it is being promoted by people with very specific interests, be incredibly skeptical about anything you encounter on that platform. Try to find spaces, not just online spaces, but everywhere. Spaces where it isn't being dominated by someone who's extremely rich or extremely powerful or extremely motivated to have you see their way. Try to find those spaces, connect with those people, talk to experts, talk to people who are knowledgeable. Try to find places that are not completely commercialized and completely dominated by profit interests, and try to remember that we do have this beautiful gift of freedom of expression that isn't limited by the law, and it's not limited by social media. We can have a better world. We can speak truth to power. We can do all of those things if we remember that these are things that belong to us, not to anyone else, and no one can take those things away from us.
Is there a role? I know there is obviously a role for government to play in figuring this out. I think you have argued and we have discussed the fact that the American government has not been at the cutting edge of figuring this out. Is there any reasonable expectation that they will be, that we can do the part that we need to do in terms of regulation over the course of the next year, a couple of years? And I'm not suggesting curtailing freedom of speech. I'm saying understanding it properly and regulating it to achieve the goals you're talking about.
Well, what you just said, I think, is the beginning step, which is to not have this knee-jerk reaction that says, well, anytime there's anything related to expression, that's censorship and you can't allow it. We have always, and every functioning country has, regulations around false speech, around harmful speech. It's a question of whether or not we're being honest about how we're making those assessments and how careful and transparent we are about this. But we have laws against fraud. We have laws against child pornography. We have laws against defamation. There are things that we can decide as a country are things that are too harmful and that undermine democracy itself to simply let ride any way that they would like to. So we have to be careful about this. We have to demand more from our legislators, and we have to tell them this is what we need you to do, because without access to the truth, without access to freedom of expression, we cannot have a democracy.
Professor Marianne Franks, good to talk to you. Thank you for being with us. Marianne Franks is a professor in intellectual property, technology, and civil rights law at the George Washington Law School. She's the author of the new book, Fearless Speech, Breaking Free from the First Amendment.